Secret sciences. Quote, "We already have the means to travel to the stars, but these technologies are locked up in the black projects, and it would take an act of God to ever get them out to benefit humanity. Anything you can imagine, we already know how to do." End quote. Ben Rich, founder of stealth technology Lockheed Skunk Works. It is now largely recognized that the United States has had a two-tiered technology development program with some major scientific developments withheld from the public. This technology has been held in the hands of a controlling elite for at least a century, perhaps longer. The secret technological base can be traced back to the 19th century or earlier. The reason certain technologies aren't being released in this modern era, especially when they will greatly benefit humanity, is simply because of control and power run amok. Once again, we are seeing the accuracy of the old adage, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. If we had the means to perform truly advanced technological feats, say for example, time travel, free energy systems, holographic communication technology, and even to travel to the planets and beyond, then those who control that information would be in a very powerful position. If it were possible to contain these developments within a very small group, a controlling group, they would have the ability, quite literally, to control the planet and humanity. Over the last century, human consciousness has been saturated with a huge intertwining web of conspiracy theories, which are often too overwhelming for the average human to understand, and may in fact produce more questions than answers. It has been very cleverly orchestrated so that no one ever discovers the whole truth about anything. But if someone does blow the whistle, then that person is ridiculed or silenced. What if a global conspiracy of silence does indeed exist? What if we already do have the means to travel to the stars, as Ben Rich, the 20-year brilliant boss of Lockheed's legendary Skunk Works, claimed in an apparent deathbed confession? What if people are kept blind to it because they commonly associate the word theory with conspiracy? And what if information buried in a secret conspiracy deeply affects our future, our media, our government, our academic system, our monetary system, our technological advancement, our food supply, and the planet we live on? Just consider that if such a conspiracy of secrecy does exist, it would affect virtually every person alive. But due to the overwhelming nature of such a possibility, most people do not want to take a look. The implications are very steep. The very idea of a conspiracy theory, as noted in the introduction to this audiobook, can be manipulated by the conspirators themselves. Efforts to investigate claims made by astronauts, Air Force pilots, scientists, engineers, and thousands of average citizens have generally been discussed in the mainstream media as entertainment, imaginative quackery, and science fiction. Failing that, individuals who come forth are tainted by labels of gullibility on the one hand and mental illness on the other. This cover-up appears to be such a concerted effort about a phenomenon that doesn't go away that a conspiracy of silence and cover-up for a real phenomenon seems a logical explanation. The TV show The X-Files popularized the term, "The truth is out there," and it is, sometimes right before our eyes, if we'd only choose to notice. There is far more to the workings of the world than what is readily apparent. If one does not take the time to examine the evidence and find out the reasons for layers of secrecy, then the problem will certainly never go away. When the complete storyline is woven together, what we have is an alternative narrative, which is comprehensive in scope. Modern secret sciences. The earliest secret science projects actually started prior to World War I and were concerned with weapons development. The better-known programs were started during and after World War II. The U.S. Army's Manhattan Project was in charge of developing the atomic bomb, while the U.S. Navy dealt with stealth equipment and invisibility, as witnessed in the Philadelphia experiment. The secret agenda keepers had to find a way around congressional oversight and public scrutiny. They did it with the introduction of Special Access Programs, SAPs. By the year 2000, there were already 150 SAPs within the Department of Defense alone. The existence of many SAPs are unacknowledged and have no oversight. All are managed on a strict need-to-know basis. The SAPs, now dominated by private contractors, are completely independent classification systems. It is not known how much money goes in and how it is acquired. This runaway secrecy has become so monolithic, so vast, it has spawned not only a secret space program, but also a breakaway civilization living off planet. After World War II, the top Nazi intelligence agents were joined with German scientists and brought to the USA under Project Paperclip, which was discussed earlier. The intelligence officers joined with American anti-communist agents, and the scientists teamed up with NASA. From this merging, the National Security Agency, the NSA, was officially inaugurated. Many of the paperclip Nazis joined the newly formed CIA. Werner von Braun and other German rocket engineers were employed by NASA and other military organizations. Previous experiments, such as Babylon Working and the Montauk Project, were carried out using Nazi occultists and scientists to communicate with and materialize interdimensional beings and extraterrestrials. They were the unofficial pioneers of projects working on interdimensional time travel, as well as the emerging dark sciences such as eugenics and cloning. This is how these projects, called the secret sciences, were officially yet covertly born, with any leaks of their reality dealt with as science fiction. An off-ledger black budget was established to fund the secret sciences, which also became known as the black arts or black sciences. The black sciences are the most secret of all secrets and are guarded by specially screened soldiers. The CIA planned and trained the MK-Ultra agents, who were specifically programmed, mind-manipulated assassins, if necessary, courtesy of a little-known black world agency that takes care of things outside of normal channels. Starting with Eisenhower and finalized by Nixon, this parallel world that deals with anything ET or backward engineered has now been privatized. It is now managed by military-industrial complex companies, which are privately owned by the Rockefeller and Rothschild dynasties, among others. There are so many layers and compartments, so many unseen realms, that even the highest level people involved may not know or comprehend the big picture. Project MK Ultra was the code name for a covert, illegal CIA human experimentation program run by the CIA's Office of Scientific Intelligence. The official US government program began in the early 1950s and continued at least through the late 1960s, using US and Canadian citizens as test subjects. The published evidence indicates that Project MK Ultra involved the use of many methodologies to manipulate individual mental states and alter brain function, including the serendipitous administration of drugs, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, verbal and sexual abuse, as well as other forms of torture. This evidence is now in the public domain and has been reported in some segments of the mainstream media with muted public reaction. Shadow government leaders have long known the advantage of compartmentalizing the secret sciences on a need-to-know basis only. New knowledge was not and still is not available to the regular military ranks, to Congress, or just about any university professor. The most valuable secrets remain in the hands of a powerful, corrupt few who have tied themselves to the World Bank for the future funding of their projects. They have also developed their think tanks, such as the Stanford Research Institute and Britain's Tavistock Institute, as both fronts and laboratories to keep the public fooled about virtually everything. Atmosphere weapons. Since its founding, the National Security Agency, the NSA, has been a very dangerous group, as they control some of the technology that has the potential to harm the natural order of Earth, with the possibility of even destroying the planet. These elite scientists, spies, and powerful industrialists have developed top-secret projects such as the nuclear bomb, chemical and biological warfare, and HAARP, the misnamed High-Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, which has nothing to do with studying the Northern Lights. The HAARP Alaska operation is about weather control, or more correctly named HAARP, the High Altitude Research Program. In essence, HAARP is a massive beam cannon, a type of global microwave oven that can move weather systems. The NSA, along with defense contractors such as Raytheon, are behind other cutting-edge technology such as the stealth aircraft, invisible hovercraft, extremely low-frequency ELF mind control devices, and the cloning or reproduction of biological human-like species, plus engineering supersedes for agricultural patents used by multinational companies such as Monsanto. On April 28, 1997, just as the Alaska HAARP operation was becoming fully operational, the Department of Defense News made the following curious warning to the public. The report stated, quote, "Others are engaging even in an echo type of terrorism whereby they can alter the climate, set off earthquakes and volcanoes remotely through the use of electromagnetic waves. So there are plenty ingenious minds out there that are at work finding ways in which they can wreak terror upon other nations. It's real, and that's the reason why we have to intensify our efforts, and that's why this is so important," end quote. Is there any doubt the big players within the U.S. military-industrial complex are not completely involved? Research into the use of microwave weapons and their use for mind control began in the 1950s at the Tavistock Institute, one of Britain's leading psychiatric research establishments. The United Kingdom Institute was researching strategies of mind control, which could be inflicted on the British populace without their awareness. The brain state of most interest to British scientists was the monkey submission response, whereby the dominant monkey caused submissive behavior in its underlings. Having discovered the specific brainwave pattern for docile, submissive, or zombie-like behavior, it was then recorded and used as the template for the invention of the extremely low frequency, the ELF signal beamed by UK microwave transmitters. Britain was the first discoverer of microwave technology used for radar in the 1940s, and therefore had a commanding lead in the field. The 1970s brought an even darker side to the story when the news that the Soviets were microwaving the US Embassy in Moscow. 1/3 of the staff eventually died of cancer, believed to be due to microwave irradiation. These weapons transmit ELF signals which mimic natural brainwaves. At the flick of a switch, anyone around these microwave transmitters can potentially be turned into submissive zombies who cannot think clearly and become depressed or apathetic. Australian scientists found in 1997 tests that tiny amounts of microwave produced by even the smallest, very safest mobile phones can cause cancer in mice when exposed to this radiation. Although this information is also in the public domain, other opinions and studies offer contradictory evidence. Once again, it is up to the individual to decide. Also keep in mind that in Havana, Cuba, the US Embassy was also attacked with microwave weapons in 2017, causing many of those workers to come down with rapidly forming cancer and other health problems, forcing many of them to return home, and the closing and partial closing of the US Embassy in Cuba. The Philadelphia experiment. The Philadelphia experiment was carried out several times at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and out at sea. The experiment, labeled Project Rainbow, was designed to make the U.S. Navy destroyer escort USS Eldridge invisible or cloaked to enemy devices. The Navy began the project in the 1930s and 1940s, featuring Nikola Tesla, the brilliant Serbian-American electrical wizard, as the lead engineer. The mission was to make ships invisible from the enemy. The experiment was based on theoretical implications of the unified field theory, a term coined by Albert Einstein. The unified field theory sought to describe mathematically and physically the interrelated nature of these forces that comprise electromagnetic radiation and gravity. According to eyewitness accounts, scientists thought that a variation of the unified field theory would enable the Navy to use several large electrical generators to bend light around an object so that it became completely invisible. Quantum physics experiments in the past decade have succeeded in making small objects invisible using similarly described light manipulation techniques. However, the technology might have been known decades earlier and is only now exposed to public scrutiny. Testing in the Philadelphia experiment began in the summer of 1943, and it was successful to a limited degree. The first test on July 22nd, 1943, resulted in the USS Eldridge being rendered almost completely invisible. Some witnesses reported a greenish fog appearing in its place. Crew members supposedly complained of severe nausea afterwards. A few weeks later, on August 12th, the test was attempted again, and this time there was a blue flash, and the ship disappeared totally. When the ship reappeared 4 hours later, some sailors were embedded in the metal structures of the ship, including one sailor who ended up on a deck level below the position where he had begun, with his hand embedded in the steel hull of the ship. The hand had to be amputated. Other sailors above deck continued appearing and disappearing. At that point, the experiment was altered at the request of the Navy, with the new objective being solely to render the Eldridge invisible to radar. The equipment was not properly recalibrated, but in spite of this, the experiment was repeated for the last time on October 28, 1943. The experimenters threw the switch on this eventful evening, and the ship again went into hyperspace. This time, the Eldridge not only became invisible, but the ship and crew physically vanished from the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard in a flash of blue light and teleported to Norfolk, Virginia, over 320 kilometers away. It is claimed that the Eldridge sat for about 10 or 15 minutes in full view of men aboard the ship USS Andrew Forsyth in Norfolk, whereupon the Eldridge vanished from their sight and then reappeared in Philadelphia at the site it had originally occupied. It was also said that the ship traveled back in time for about 10 seconds. The three experiments resulted in a variety of problems for the different crews on the Eldridge. There are descriptions of serious side effects for the crew. Some sailors were said to have been physically fused to the bulkheads, while others suffered from mental disorders, and still others simply vanished. It is also claimed that the ship's crew was subjected to intense brainwashing afterwards in order to maintain the secrecy of the experiments. The Navy regarded it as top secret security information. In addition, having experimented with a new technology that went awry, there was all the more reason for secrecy. Subsequently, all public references to the Philadelphia experiment were labeled a hoax. In the end, it was a huge success as well as a huge failure. Of course, the Navy denied ever doing it and then officially shelved any future experiments, at least those involving enlisted men. Calling in Dr. Brown. It seems the Norfolk, Virginia Naval Shipyard could be a key vortex point on the Earth's surface and connected with the abnormal behaviors of aircraft flying in the area, including the nearby Bermuda Triangle. Prior to the Philadelphia experiment, observers had described strange warp effects in the atmosphere of the Norfolk Navy Shipyard. Navy engineers first attributed this to the blast of high-intensity electromagnetic fields from the arc welding going on in shipbuilding. As word of these strange effects reached the highest levels, top brass called in Dr. Thomas Brown to investigate, and it was from these observations that the Philadelphia experiment was eventually born. Dr. Thomas Townsend Brown was one of the secret fathers of anti-gravity technology. He worked in the UFO field with electrostatics, attempting to prove that it was possible to make an object move by means of very high voltage electrostatic fields. The reason his name is not famous is because his work was classified for national security reasons. He discovered that strong electromagnetic fields produce an anti-gravity effect. Brown created a strong enough flow of current between a negative and positive pole that an anti-gravity thrust started propelling his device in whatever direction the positive pole was pointing. In Brown's designs, the negative pole is much larger than the positive pole. When considering a craft design like this, the entire bottom of the ship is a negative plate, and the small sphere at the very top of the ship as the positive plate. Pilots can navigate the ship by breaking up the negative plate into a series of sections and varying the current flow between them, where the ship falls into the gravity field it produces. Dr. Brown was asked to examine the Philadelphia experiment phenomenon and comment on what the observers saw. That is, the dematerializations and what could have caused them. His knowledge of dielectric stress phenomenon and the activities associated with arc discharges made him a qualified expert. When Dr. Brown reviewed the material, his conclusions were strikingly different from the majority opinion. While some scientists adamantly insisted that the observed dematerializations were the result of irradiation and subsequent vaporization, no such evidence for the vaporizations could be found. Careful analysis of weld chamber atmospheres proved negative in this regard. No gasified metals were detected in the room air throughout the discharge event. This fact was truly mystifying. Dr. Brown was confident he knew what was happening between the two shipyards. Despite the fact that he had never observed these effects, his intuition taught him well. Not surprisingly, Brown's principle directly ties in with quantum mechanics. He proposed there are negatively charged electron clouds and a positively charged nucleus in the atom. The Byfield-Brown effect is what causes the electrons to rush into the nucleus. Having no conventional electrical explanation, the only resolution was found in the Einsteinian proposals concerning electrical and gravitational force unity. A mind-controlled chair. An earlier invention was also used in the Philadelphia experiment. A mind-altering prototype chair had been back-engineered from a recovered gray alien craft and was used in the Philadelphia experiment. This chair was essentially a mind amplifier. The shadow government planned to have specially trained individuals sit in the chair and generate thought forms which would be amplified and transmitted. Engineers could transmit a signal which would put people in a pre-orgasmic state in which they would be receptive to programming. The thought transmission worked very well, and the experimenters found other capabilities. They discovered that it could also work in conjunction with time travel. A psychically trained individual would sit in the chair and generate a thought form of a vortex that connected 1947 and 1981. And that's exactly what they got, a time travel tunnel they could walk through. These were some of the earlier capabilities in which individuals started going forward and backward in time. That was the last phase of what was labeled Phoenix Project. Around 1979 or 1980, the Phoenix Project time machine was fully operational. The transmitter had enough power and warp space and time. The individual in the chair would have to synthesize the vortex function because they did not have the technical capability. It can now be mechanically synthesized. The protocol called for the subject in the chair to think of some creature, and then the creature would materialize. They instructed the individual in the chair to think of all the animals at Montauk Point charging into town, and that's exactly what happened. They nearly succeeded in creating a synthetic being. The problem was that what they created only stayed as long as the mind amplifier was on. It had tremendous power, somewhere between gigawatts and terawatts. The vortex diameter could be projected outward to about 7 kilometers. Montauk Project. Montauk is a small seaside resort town on the tip of Long Island, New York, that draws vacationers to its shores every year. Camp Hero, located a short distance outside of Montauk, has roots going back to the Revolutionary War when it was used to test military cannons. Camp Hero served as a coastal defense installation against potential invasions during World War II. Before closing in the early 1980s, this military base at Montauk Point, especially the underground base that was reportedly there, was the center of an otherworldly conspiracy operation which lasted for decades. This conspiracy theory alleged that people were being kidnapped and taken to U.S. Air Force Base, where they were subjected to mind control and time travel experiments. There was also a tie-in to the ship disappearing from the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, plus alleged tall reptoid extraterrestrials who were also somehow had a hand in it all. All of those experiments have been dubbed the Montauk Project. Several witnesses have come forward to say they ended up at the Camp Hero underground base near Montauk for scientific experiments. These witnesses reported seeing ETs working alongside human scientists. The main whistleblower is Alfred Bielik, a retired electrical engineer who maintains he was a survivor of the mysterious 1943 Philadelphia experiment and was part of the crew who traveled through time. Mr. Bielik and his brother Duncan Cameron jumped off the Eldridge while it was in hyperspace and ended up in an instant at the secret base in Montauk on August 12, 1983. The Black Operations military personnel working with certain ET groups tried the same experiment 40 years after 1943 on the same date and time and opened up a hole in time between the two eras. If this hole were not closed, according to Mr. Bielik, then our world could have been destroyed. Mr. Bielik stated that his brother decided to stay in the future with the identity Duncan Cameron, while he himself agreed to go back to 1943 in order to close the hole by destroying the equipment on board the USS Eldridge. He did accomplish this task, and the holes were closed. However, in Montauk, through contact with the aliens, there was a time tunnel that existed there in 1983. Also, during the 1943 experiment, 3 UFOs were hovering overhead, witnessing the Philadelphia experiment. When the ship vanished, one of the UFOs was caught up in the energy vortex hole and was transported into the future. Bielek's brother, who stayed in the future, became quite fascinated with the time tunnel at Montauk. He stated that the government saw him as a liability and would have killed him, except that his molecular structure was connected with the 2 holes in time in 1943 and 1983. Furthermore, they believed if they killed him, it could also cause a ripple effect that would reopen these holes. Thus, they used the technology they had received from the aliens to regress him to a baby and sent him back in time to 1927 when he was exchanged for the son of the Bielek family. Somehow his brother got caught in the time tunnel experiment, and again, they had the same situation, where if he died, his death could cause the holes in time to reopen. So again, using some strange technology of the aliens, they were able to take the soul, the life force of his brother, and place it in the body of his father's 3rd son. The military goals and technological connections between the Philadelphia experiment and the Montauk project became known as the Phoenix Project, which resulted in the ripping open of a huge hole in space-time. According to Al Bielek, this was deliberately done by the aliens on the 1983 end to create a rift in the fabric of space-time, enabling a large number of aliens and ships to come through. All of the alien spacecraft had time travel capabilities, but the rift was needed to get the largest ships through in order to expedite a mass invasion of the Earth by malevolent reptoid aliens. Interestingly, abduction researcher Dr. Carla Turner has reported a spike in human abductions and missing people starting around the mid-1980s. The Phoenix Project may very well be the most esoteric of all the secret sciences. But there are other subjects we will cover now that may not seem so much like a science fiction novel. Tibetan acoustic levitation. Tibetan priests of the Far East were said to have the ability to lift heavy boulders up high mountains simply by creating various sounds. Knowledge of the various vibrations in the audio range suggests to some scientists of sound physics that a vibrating and condensed sound field can nullify the power of gravitation, hence levitation. While studying at Oxford, a Swedish physician named Dr. Jarl became friends with a young Tibetan student. A couple of years later, in 1939, Dr. Jarl was urgently requested by his student friend to medically treat a High Lama in Tibet. Dr. Jarl requested a leave and followed a designated messenger on a long journey by plane and yak caravans to the monastery where his young friend and the old Lama were now living and holding high positions. Dr. Jarl stayed there for some time and, because of his friendship with the Tibetans, learned many things that other foreigners had no chance to observe firsthand. One day his friend took him to a place in the neighborhood of the monastery and showed him a sloping meadow surrounded on the northwest by high cliffs. Perched on one of the rock walls at a height of about 250 meters was a big hole that looked like the entrance to a cave. In front of this hole was a platform where the monks were building a rock wall. The only access to this platform was from the top of the cliff, and the monks lowered themselves down with the help of ropes. In the middle of the meadow, about 250 meters from the cliff, was a polished slab of rock with a bowl-like cavity in the center. A block of stone was maneuvered into this cavity by yak oxen. The block was 1 meter wide and 1.5 meters long. Then 19 musical instruments were set in an arc of 90 degrees at a distance of 63 meters from the stone slab. The radius of 63 meters was measured precisely. The musical instruments consisted of 13 drums and 6 trumpets. When the stone was in position, the monks behind the small drum gave a signal to start the music and chanting. The small drum had a very sharp sound and could be heard even with the other instruments making a terrible din. All the monks were singing and chanting a prayer, slowly increasing the tempo of this unbelievable noise. The monks, with their instruments, formed exactly 1/4 of a circle with all their sound pressure directed at the bowl depression in the ground where the stone was positioned. During the first 4 minutes, nothing happened. Then, as the speed of the drumming and the noise increased, the big stone block started to rock and sway and suddenly took off into the air with an increasing speed in the direction of the platform in front of the cave hole, 250 meters high. When the trumpets rose up, so did the monks' attention, focused on the rocks in the air. After 3 minutes of ascent, it landed on the platform. The Tibetans continuously brought new blocks to the meadow, and the monks, using the method, transported 5 to 6 blocks per hour on a parabolic flight track approximately 500 meters long and 250 meters high. From time to time, a stone would split, and the monks moved the split stones away. Dr. Jarl had heard about the Tibetans hurling massive stones, but he was the first Westerner who had the opportunity to see this remarkable spectacle. Dr. Jarl was careful to point out that the stones took 3 whole minutes to rise, so this was not simply a sudden catapulting effect. Rather, it was more like a slow, deliberate movement. This suggests that the ether vibrates in a harmonic resonance, and the vibrations can be measured very precisely and put into numbers. This act of levitation was not a product of fantasy, but the entire setup was carefully observed, measured, and even filmed. Unfortunately, the English Scientific Society, for which Dr. Jarl was working, confiscated his films of the procedure and declared them classified. They have never been released. Forbidden patents. Anything that has to do with free energy or anti-gravity breakthroughs such as developed by the Tibetans are under strict control and are not made public. According to the American Academy of Sciences, there are more than 6,000 patents that have been suppressed for so-called national security or public safety reasons. The Federation of American Scientists puts that number at 5,135 withheld inventions that have been classified up to the end of fiscal year 2010. There is no doubt that some of these patents probably need to be suppressed. For example, we don't want everyone to have a backyard nuke. But there are other classified patents which utilize benevolent technology and could be used for the benefit of the human race. Among the forbidden energy patents, Any power system that is more than 70 to 80% efficient at converting energy will automatically be declared classified information. Such uber energy efficient blueprints or free energy patents have been around for decades but have never been released. These patents are kept classified because the cabal wants to have exclusive control of this knowledge. After all, energy manufacture and distribution is the world's largest industry. Other forbidden patents are the biological agents used in germ warfare, originally developed for military purposes. Bioweapons can be made to target certain people or even certain ethnic groups. The H1N1 swine flu pandemic of 2009 has been tied to being introduced by the UN and World Health Organization as a bioweapon attack. Dr. Robert Gallo is a leading U.S. biomedical researcher who is credited with discovering the human immunodeficiency virus, HIV, in the mid-1980s. 15 years prior, Gallo forged a close relationship with the U.S. military when he worked to develop several diseases which could be used as synthetic biological weapons. Gallo, the discoverer of HIV/AIDS, was also the inventor of the deadly virus while overseeing military bionetics contractor Litton Industries. Dr. Robert Strecker verified these claims in an extensive report identifying HIV/AIDS as being developed as an intentional human-made virus bioengineered in American laboratories and unleashed as part of a covert eugenics program. The head of vaccines at pharmaceutical giant Merck, Dr. Maurice Hillerman, admitted on camera that Merck's hepatitis V vaccines, contaminated with virus, introduced the AIDS epidemic in Central African countries to gay populations in the USA. Furthermore, Hillerman claimed that all of Merck's vaccines are contaminated with cancer and other viruses. Over the last decades, elite researchers have learned that all viruses are crystalline in structure and that the correct frequency can destroy them, as demonstrated by inventor Royal Raymond Wright and others. The powers that be have not released this information, likely because their eugenics programs for culling the human population continues. They are ruthless in their pursuit to maintain certain sciences secret, including suiciding prominent doctors on the verge of a breakthrough. The loss of Dr. Bradstreet in June 2015 raised many eyebrows, just as his findings of GCMAF treating autism and Nagalese as a vaccine-induced inhibitor started to influence others who also mysteriously died. A detailed study by Dr. Marcia Angel, the former editor of the prestigious New England Journal of Medicine, says that only 14% of pharmaceutical companies' budgets goes to research and development of drugs. Quote, usually at the uncreative final part of the drug pipeline. The rest goes to marketing and profits, end quote. And even with that paltry 14%, drug companies squander a fortune developing the so-called Me Too drugs. These are medicines that do exactly the same job as a drug that already exists, but is changed by as little as one molecule. and re-released as a new product. Then the company can take out a new patent and reap another avalanche of profits. Forget about R&D on the diseases that kill the majority of people, like malaria. Because victims of malaria are poor, there's hardly any profit in developing new medications. Rockefeller manipulations. The Rockefeller family oil empire got started in 1870 when John D. Rockefeller founded Standard Oil and became America's first billionaire. Standard Oil has since morphed into the world's most profitable corporation, ExxonMobil, and several other massive multinational corporations. In 1911, the Sherman Antitrust Act was passed to oppose these monolithic entities, such as monopolies or cartels that would harm competition. In theory, the act broke up John D. Rockefeller's monopoly, Standard Oil. However, the reality is that the Rockefellers never lost control over the spin-offs, thus retaining a dominating presence in the oil industry despite the intent of the law. With such immense wealth at their disposal, the Rockefellers diversified into other industries, namely the military, medical, petrochemical, pharmaceutical cartel. It should come as little surprise that they were primarily responsible for the global shift to large-scale petroleum-based agriculture, thus controlling the nation's food supply. This shift characterizes modern agricultural practices, which the industrialized West spread throughout the globe under the term Green Revolution. The Green Revolution was the brainchild of the Rockefeller Foundation's Natural Science Division in partnership with large agricultural corporations. Using their vast influence, these foundations pushed their agricultural agenda, lobbying Congress and the World Bank for financial support and persuading other foundations such as Kellogg and Milbank Memorial to join the cause. By the 1960s, $3 billion a year was directed toward developing agricultural practices in the developing world. Today, such development is still supported by powerful foundations with private interests. For example, the Gates Foundation granted the International Rice Research Institute $19.9 million in 2008. The so-called Green Revolution has also been associated with the development and distribution of hybridized seeds and synthetic fertilizers and pesticides. The true costs of the Green Revolution can now be seen with taxpayers paying billions in subsidies to giant agribusiness corporations. Small family farms have all but disappeared. Biodiversity is destroyed. Toxic chemicals poison farm workers and pollute the land, water, and our food supply, endangering the health of everyone. What if it were possible to discourage critical thinking in the public in such a way that people would never put all the pieces together? One useful way to do this would be to control the educational system. It was the Rockefellers who created the National Education Association, the NEA, with help from the Carnegie Foundation and later from the Ford Foundation. What the captains of industry wanted from our schools was an obedient and docile workforce who would be manageable employees and eager consumers. In the early 20th century, both the Rockefeller and Carnegie Foundations were donating large sums of money to education and the social sciences. They supported, in particular, the National Education Association. By way of grants, they spent millions of dollars, monies which were used to radically bend the traditional educational system toward a new system that favored standardized testing over critical thinking and that facilitated scientific management of schools. This was part of a calculated plan to make the school system benefit corporate America, which of course came at the expense of authentic education of American school children. Powerful foundations with private interests, such as the Ford Foundation, continue to support and thereby influence the policy of the NEA to this day. The Federal Reserve was also involved in creating the National Education Association via the Rockefeller family. An unprecedented U.S. congressional investigation into tax-exempt foundations has identified the Rockefeller and Carnegie Foundation's engagement in an agenda for vast population control. Norman Dodd, research director for the Congressional Committee, found this statement in the archives of the Carnegie Endowment. Quote, "The only way to maintain control of the population was to obtain control of education in the U.S. They realized this was a prodigious task, so they approached the Rockefeller Foundation with the suggestion that they go in tandem and that the portion of education which could be considered as domestically orientated be taken over by the Rockefeller Foundation, and that portion which was orientated to international matters be taken over by the Carnegie Endowment," end quote. Lastly, the American Medical Association, the AMA, is largely funded by the Rockefellers, who in turn use their funding to influence AMA research, development, and medical decision-making. After all, if you own and control the pharmaceutical industry, it would certainly make sense to secretly run the agency in charge of regulating your products. In an effort to control the medical education establishment and to gain power over this large and vital sphere of American life, from as early as 1910, the Rockefeller and Carnegie Foundations have been giving money to the AMA. And this vital sphere would also include what is not released to the public, but actively suppressed. The fate of Royal Raymond Rife is an example of the controller's ability to suppress and destroy. Killing the cancer cure. The inventor Royal Raymond Rife developed a technique called coordinative resonance in the 1930s that was apparently able to destroy cancerous tumors as well as viruses. Rife's treatment was tested on 16 terminally ill cancer patients. Within 3 months, they were all successfully cured. Through the efforts of Morris Fishenbein, head of the Journal of the American Medical Association, Rife was essentially shut down and his brilliant and promising work was ruined and all but forgotten. But the idea could not be destroyed, and there are still Rife practitioners attempting to use his technology. They are regularly harassed and continue to operate outside of the US and at their own peril. Rife's shutdown is only one example among dozens more, according to the Thrive website. Rene Cailles had an old Ojibwe Indian formula that was also effective for treating cancer. Harry Hoxsey and Max Gerson had natural remedies that worked. But if you look at medical documents discussing these remedies, the AMA cleverly makes them sound like complete quacks. These are but a few examples of the many sad stories of suppression, simply so the elite can maintain control of the lucrative medical industry. If the medical and the pharmaceutical industry is putting profits over people, shutting down potential cancer cures, suppressing innovations, and gouging money out of an already strapped economy, then why would anyone want to keep this deeply flawed system going? In short, there are many dissenters and organizations working for change, but so far they are no match for the entrenched, moneyed interests which have literally bought the government. The drug companies have spent more than $3 billion on lobbyists and political contributions over the past decade in the US alone. They have paid politicians to make the system work in their interests. Republican Congressman Walter Burton illustrated how deep this influence goes when he admitted that the, quote, pharmaceutical lobbyists wrote the bill, end quote, referring to the healthcare legislation passed in 2003. Dr. Rich spills the beans. Dr. Ben R. Rich, a former head of the Lockheed Skunk Works, that is the secret and highly advanced arm of Lockheed Martin, admitted in a 1994 deathbed confession that extraterrestrial UFO visitors were real. He confirmed there were two types of UFOs, the ones we build and the ones they build. Quote, "We learned how to build ours from crash retrievals and actual hand-me-downs," end quote, Rich said. Nearly all biomorphic aerospace designs were inspired by the original Roswell spacecraft, that is, from Kelly's SR-71 Blackbird onward to today's drones, UCAVs, and other highly advanced aerospace craft, such as the U-2, the SR-71 Blackbird, the F-22 Raptor, and the F-117 Nighthawk. All used aspects of UFO technology that have been backward engineered. Quote, "Of course the government knew," exclaimed Rich, "but it was becoming more difficult for them to manage the black operations." Until 1969, the US government took an active role in the administration of all UFO and ET information. After a 1969 Nixon purge, oversight responsibility was handed off to an international board of directors in the private sector, such as Raytheon, and there it has remained. Ben Rich would not be the only aerospace executive to leak this type of information. Leonard Stringfield, Dr. Robert Sauerbacher, and Dr. Eric Walker also made detailed confessions of backward engineered UFO technology towards the end of their lives. By 1988, the Lockheed Skunk Works was operating exotic propulsion spacecraft called ARVs, or Alien Reproduction Vehicles. Another system called the Fluxliner culminated in the development of 3 different sized vehicles. One was about 7.5 meters in diameter, codenamed Baby Bear. Next in size was an 18-meter version, codenamed Mama Bear. The largest craft, between 38 and 40 meters in diameter, was codenamed Papa Bear. Each craft had the same general shape and proportions, with the exception of its hatch and synthetic vision system, which remained uniform through all sizes of the craft. The propulsion system was based upon zero-point energy, and it was said to be capable of light speed or better, according to a three-star general making a presentation on the craft. These second space program inventions were being developed in secret, while the above-ground relatively primitive space shuttle program was touted as progress to a fascinated and gullible American public. It was originally Ben Rich's opinion that the public should not be told about UFOs and extraterrestrials. He believed people would panic and could not handle the truth, not ever. Only in the last months of his physical decline did he change his tune and begin to feel that the International Corporate Board of Directors dealing with the subject could represent a bigger problem to citizens' personal freedoms under the Constitution than the presence of the off-world visitors themselves. As someone who knew much about the secret sciences and their motives, and who was a respected business leader, Ben Rich spoke volumes during his final confessions.